Building HVAC Science. That's what we talk about. Talk about that a lot. In today's episode with Sophie Ashley of the Energy Vanguard, we welcome her to talk about being an HVAC designer. She has a background in carpentry and building science. She shares her journey, of course, as we ask all of our guests to do, because they're usually very fascinating where people come from and end up to where they are in our orbit of building science and HVAC. She covers some important aspects about feedback loops and her experience that she gained as being a HERS rater and actually doing testing, but also working in construction for the first part of her career. We talk about the shift towards high-performance homes, the growing adoption of heat pumps, and the evolving role of ventilation strategies, especially such things as ERVs. We do talk about industry challenges, the need for better collaboration, and the importance of attracting more women to the field. So let's get into this episode as Elk and I get a chance to talk with Sophie Ashley about why HVAC and construction must work together.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Building HVAC Science podcast. Eric Kaiser here, Mr. Bill Spohn over there. And our special guest today, somebody I met 3 or 4 years ago in Florida at the HVACR Training Symposium, Sophie Ashley of Energy Vanguard. Welcome, Sophie.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Really happy to have you come on the podcast. And I think you have somewhat of a unique story, and we want to hear how you got to where you're at. First, what you're doing at Energy Vanguard and how you got there.
I currently work as an HVAC designer at Energy Vanguard. We are a small firm based out of Atlanta that does third-party HVAC design and building science consulting. And I am a designer, meaning I mostly work on new construction homes, get plans from an architect, builder, owner, run load calcs on them, select heating and cooling equipment, ventilation as well, and then do duct design and just basically design the whole heating and cooling system for them, meet with contractors and any interested parties in that process. And that's what I'm doing now. And I got there through, my background is in building, is in construction. My father was a carpenter, and my first few jobs were with him in high schools and summers between college, working with him. I did then go get an undergrad degree in politics and Spanish, interestingly, and then fell back into construction when I moved to New Orleans, rebuilding homes that were flood damaged from Katrina. And through maybe a decade of building, I started to learn how to build higher performing structures, which led me into HVAC because the two trades need to be better integrated. And once I started building better, I learned how essential mechanical systems were, and they were getting more and more complex. So I've been on that rabbit hole since then, and I'm now at the moment pretty fully in the HVAC world, but still have roots in both and find it I think the integration between builders, GCs, and HVAC is just really essential.
Is the large part of your work virtual? In other words, you receive information, you output information?
Yes, it is. I actually work remotely from coastal South Carolina, so I'm not even in our headquarters of Atlanta. And I do it's all virtual. We do multiple meetings on Zoom. Construction documents are really essential. I have gotten to walk a few of my sites. It's a part of the work I would love to do more of. But at this point, it's pretty virtual. Events like the symposium that's coming up is going to be a great way to get some in-person training and hands-on stuff, but mostly virtual.
Do you ever get pushback for the designs, and how do you handle that?
We probably don't get enough pushback, to be honest. And I say that in the sense that the back end loop of our design process is not strong enough, I don't think. We do so much pre-planning, which is essential to the whole process, but probably the majority of our clients are not the installer. And so the connection with the installer is not usually fully in my control. And so I do have some interaction with them, hopefully, but not enough. We do get pushback. Some folks don't want to install someone else's design, which is a lot of people think our ducts are too big, for example. Some other pushbacks are CFM's too low, stuff like that. But all of that can be talked through. It's more of, I wish we had more feedback, to be honest, more pushback maybe, because then we would have more things to tweak. We're trying to work on this coming year too, is just how our communication style with the contractors and like simplifying the way that we are communicating what we want in order to hopefully get feedback and see how it's working.
Yeah. And I guess in the process of doing that, you got to pick your battles, like what's the most important, prioritize.
Totally.
Yeah.
I will add one thing to my work. So in addition to working at Energy Vanguard, I'm a rating field inspector for a HERS rater in my area. So I spend one day a week doing blow-door home air tightness testing and duct tightness testing on new construction homes around. So that keeps me in the field. It's not the homes I design, but it still is relevant.
Do you pull any knowledge from those inspections and think you gain any knowledge from seeing like other people's designs and installation to improve your designs?
I do. I think I definitely learn from it 100%. I would say where I learn most is, so there's attached garages on all the houses that I'm testing. And so doing like zonal pressure testing between those two, like it helps me think about or keep in tune with the parts of the building that I need to pay attention to in design or bring up in conversation for areas of a home that someone needs to spend particular attention on. And the other part of it that I learned from is how to talk to people about home performance or anything really, because the homes I'm testing are like code minimum South Carolina, as in like R13 walls, R7 ACH 50 for air tightness, like super lower performing than the ones I design on. But that gives me the chance to speak with people who are in the industry, not for energy efficiency or indoor air quality. And I think that's really important, is the soft skills and communication around better building and better HVAC.
How does that come across in the virtual meetings? How do you get that feeling across? How do they go? Are they go just more about details, or do you get into reasons why, underlying reasons? Does it become educational at sometimes?
Do you mean the virtual meetings with my Energy Vanguard clients?
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Shifting back over.
Yeah. Definitely educational. Yeah. I mean, as building science and HVAC, our clients are pretty high performing. The buildings tend to be pretty high performing. And it gets complicated. I'm sure we've all had our journeys into this world. And when you start, it's like really overwhelming. So people have a ton of questions about everything from building science to HVAC. So it's very educational. It's just the questions we get from clients are all across the board, from how a particular assembly and code requirements are going to affect the HVAC system to like where we're placing registers. So definitely educational and lots of questions.
So that feeds into a question I've often wondered about other people when they design. What's your thought process going into a design where you're starting out with a set of plans, a lot of them probably two-dimensional even? I don't know if you guys are getting into three-dimensional or if you're seeing that kind of a design coming into the new construction yet. Where do you start, and walk us through a little bit of your process about how you get to really developing a comfortable house or a comfortable system?
Definitely working off 2D plans. We don't do anything in 3D, and the quality of the plans varies a lot too. I feel grateful that my background is in construction because it helps me visualize what I'm seeing on paper, which is essential for just understanding which type of floor joists there are, or if like this cantilevered section, how to read a section, which is a cut through the building on plans. So definitely starting by visualizing the project, locating it physically, because we design all over the country. So in terms of understanding the climate that it's in, looking it up on Google Maps to find elevation and altitude and stuff like that. Obviously, the load calc really zones in on the enclosure, so what the heat loss through the walls. And then the client plays a big part in it. What are their priorities for comfort or health? Are there any sensitivities in the house? Is budget a concern? And then you just go shaping it from there. Like I was working on a design the other day where you like figuring out how I was going to break it up with different equipment, not zoning with ductwork, but like how it made sense load wise to get a certain size of capacity equipment here versus here. And it takes time and it takes a process. Coming from the field, I was like thinking computer work, oh, it's just more generic, but there's still creativity and like troubleshooting and like forming even virtually on what makes the most sense for this particular structure and how to break it up, for example. I don't know if that makes sense.
That does. You have a lot of field work. Obviously, you talked about that. And you did get a graduate level study in building science. And a lot of people, myself included, it's like, I got a graduate degree, but geez, I don't use it. Do you feel like that was beneficial to your understanding? And in what way?
It was beneficial for me. It was 1 year long, so it wasn't extended. It was pretty concise. It was after I'd worked in construction in the field for, I think, like 8 years. And so I was able to step back. It was helpful in the sense that I could step back from like making money and trying to learn while I'm making money and take some time to really learn and reflect. I went to UMass Amherst, and they have a building construction technology department with a fantastic lab. It's in a mass timber building. They have a building science lab. I did a blower door test there. They have ERVs that you break open and get to see inside. So I think I had an awesome access to that. I highly recommend it to anyone looking for that. But for those reasons that like I came into it with field experience, I had hands-on access there. It totally changed the course of my career. 100%.
One phrase you mentioned there, I want to go back to, this wasn't wood from the state of Massachusetts when you say mass timber. For listeners that might not be familiar with mass timber, could you explain what that means?
Thanks. Yeah. Mass timber is using engineered wood products for massive structural elements in a building. So this was a big, huge university building instead of using steel columns and whatnot, they were engineered lumber, so mass timber they call it, because it ends up being huge columns of small pieces of wood glued together. So folks like it because it uses less embodied carbon, less steel and concrete. It's a renewable resource. It's beautiful. And I got to study in a building with that exposed wood. It was super cool.
Nice. Yeah, and I first heard the phrase in Massachusetts at Building Science Summer Camp.
Okay.
A few years ago, and saw a presentation on that. So that's where I got tuned into mass timber.
Yeah.
We will have video clips of this podcast, and people may see over your shoulder or above your head a hanging sign from your previous business. Tell us about that business and why you picked that name.
Yeah, the sign says Boss Lady Construction, and that was the name of my company in Louisiana. I was in New Orleans for about a decade as a carpenter. I started in doing AmeriCorps, basically like a volunteer term at one of the nonprofits that was rebuilding homes. I started on their framing crew and just loved it. I love the tangible nature of framing in any type of building where you can see what you did at the end of the day. After that, I went out on my own and I was a carpenter. I did a lot of renovations, a lot of flood damaged homes, some historic preservation work. And yeah, it was great. It was wonderful. I learned a lot. I'm glad that I learned that type of work demolishing or deconstructing older buildings as opposed to like starting a new construction, because it taught me a lot about structure and craftsmanship, which a lot of modern construction lacks. But I did also get to a point where I was rebuilding homes the same way they were built before. And I'm like, I got to get more intentional about this, which is what led me to pursue the graduate studies program, to be like, let me step back and see how I can put buildings into the world that are going to have a better long-term prognosis.
Chance of survival.
Yeah, chance of survival.
Which did you like more, framing, or I'm assuming with remodeling, like you're transitioning into finished carpentry there, and there's oftentimes a lot of separation between those two.
Yeah. Framing is my favorite. I'm a pretty detailed person, so I can certainly do trim work, but I love structure. I love seeing it go up. I love understanding the load path and how stuff is carried down, and just like how you get a pile of wood on the ground to become a 20-foot tall house is just the coolest thing. It helps me in my HVAC work too. I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges is people don't leave room for ducts. No one thinks about it up front. And then you just bring the contractor in and tell them to make it work. And so in my designs, part of what I do is get in early on the design, understand the framing members and like where everything is, and advocate for open web trusses in the floors mostly. Like, you have to give us more space, because contractors get screwed when they're brought in at the end and they have to just make something work. And then they get blamed when people aren't comfortable, and it's not fair.
Yeah, it's amazing how those little decisions early on in such a large, complicated process can make a huge difference on the back end and years down the road. I think a lot of people just think of When they're thinking about trusses, oh, we don't want the floors to move and we don't want them to squeak. But what else are they doing for that building and for the occupants of that building long term? So I think that's a really, really great observation there. And it's something that's hard to think about when, for me anyhow, I find it challenging. I love doing it, but there's a lot to it when you start off with something that big and just try to envision all of it. Do you find yourself getting lost in the details in things like that sometimes? Or is that something where it's easy for you to parse out and make in steps?
I definitely get lost in details. I would say don't get lost in the details of the framing so much or understanding plans, but I get lost in rabbit hole details of a certain topic that needs more fleshing out, and I just into the manuals or whatnot. But I feel lucky with my background in terms of being able to visualize the structure. I think that is a challenge for a lot of virtual designers, and it can be a pitfall. And I'm not saying I'm perfect at it by any means, but I rely heavily on my visual memory of working in those structures.
What's going to happen here? And can a duct actually fit through there and not make the house collapse while it's being put in?
Exactly. Like just framing members, how many inches on center, and then the width of the material, little things like that go a long way.
Yeah, and if we've spent much time on the internet, I think a lot of us have seen horrible pictures of where framing members and trusses and things have been just cut out by somebody that maybe didn't understand the need for that piece right where they cut it out.
Which is why I love the intersection. I really feel like carpentry and HVAC just have to be more integrated. I mean, that's why I'm in this role here now, is like trying to learn the other side, quote unquote, which sounds divisive, but it's just, they have to be hand in hand, and they are, in the higher performing world, they are more now, but in the general world, they're not. And I wish HVAC installers get blamed a lot for poor things that the enclosure is doing wrong. There's a lot of hate and blame thrown around when it's just needs more integration earlier on for it to be successful.
Yeah, we're all facets of the same big ball or the same structure, and everybody's got a little piece and a part to play in that.
When it comes to the work that you do you have any favorite types of equipment, or even if you feel comfortable with the brands, or just in general, are there any like go-tos that are at the top of your list? And why are they?
We do a lot of cold climate heat pumps, which is really fun. And we do sometimes get pushback on that, but we've been very successful with that. I think I also came into the industry newer, so I don't have the old training of that wouldn't work. So I'm a super heat pump fan. We do a lot of ERVs and fresh air ventilation with ERVs. I would say that's a favorite in terms of learning. I haven't had my hands on enough ERVs to be a favorite machine that I'm feel like I own and that I really master. But I also have done a couple designs with the Serve 2, which I think, Bill, you may have in your house. And so I'm pretty fascinated by that right now. Similarly, like in a learning phase, I haven't had my hands on one yet, unfortunately, but it's a pretty interesting. The Serve 2, for those who may not know, is like a mini heat pump all in one. It can do ventilation, has some heating and cooling capacity as well, and the controls on it are pretty advanced in terms of deciding when it's demand ventilation. So instead of a continuous rate, it ventilates based on indoor air quality, which I think is really cool. And yeah, I'd say those are some of my favorite machines.
I'll just interject one thing. I'm allowed to talk about this. Ben Newell from Build Equinox, who makes the Serve 2, they're coming out with a particulate sensing option soon. And they just sent me one. It came yesterday. Now, I can't install it until I get back from all this travel, but it includes a particulate sensor for the return airstream and one for the fresh air. And that'll let the Serve reduce indoor particulates while protecting against outdoor ones. And I also believe there's an outdoor VOC sensor. So the idea now is to think more about the impact of the environment. Like fresh air isn't always fresh. this is really cool add-on that they're working on now. And it's got some new software that goes along with it too for controls.
That's very cool. I definitely think demand ventilation is great. Allison Bales is my boss and Jeffrey Sauls is also my boss. They're two of the founders of Energy Vanguard. They both have ERVs in their house and they both recently showed us pictures of their filters. And they even have, Jeffrey has a pre-filter on his. So this is the fresh air coming into the ERV and they get so dirty and it affects airflow. And my first thought when they said that was, well, maybe we don't need to ventilate that much. That might help. If we were to ventilate when we needed it with demand ventilation, that filter would probably last longer.
Yeah, it's amazing how much dirt we can pick up from outdoor air like that we consider as fresh air.
Right.
It's funny, and you've probably seen this tearing apart old houses. You find that black insulation in there. I love to call that the whole house air filter. We should change that periodically.
Yeah.
People don't get that joke.
From your perspective, is there anything that's missing? And you maybe could talk about the industry as a whole from your perspective or things you've encountered missing in terms of education, product, process.
And when you're saying industry, you're saying the comfort industry, Bill?
Let's use that.
There's always room for improvement. I want to say before I say what's missing that I have found an incredible community in this industry and that the people that I've learned from are so collaborative and so smart and so giving with knowledge and helpful and not arrogant that it's awesome. I think in the world, the industry gets a bad name often because consumers, it's expensive or they're not comfortable. And I even had that coming in as a builder, but I think first and foremost, it's really an awesome industry that is put in really tough situations, basically. But things to improve, certainly, of course, education. I think consumers need to be willing to pay more. I think a lot of the problem comes down to folks not having the money to pay for the services that would serve them the best. I would love to see more women in the industry for sure, which I have some amazing mentors and that is happening too. But I would say that's a piece I would love to see built up even more. That's a big question. There's a lot I could say, but those were a couple things.
Thank you. I know that was a pretty big one to throw at you. And it sounds like one thing you'd like to see, I'll put words in your mouth, is you'd like to see this community larger.
Yeah.
You'd like to see it grow. Yeah. And have more tentacles to touch.
Like the symposium we're about to go to. I mean, I just wish everyone could attend that. And it's growing and HVAC, our school puts out so much content and you do too. It is happening, but yeah, love that to be amplified.
Yeah. From a more ancient person in the industry like me, it is tremendous from where it used to be. So it's all about perspective. I think it is growing and it will continue to grow. I think the fusion reaction has started. It's not going to stop. Have any extracurricular things you do that would be interesting to talk about?
I don't know if they would be interesting, but I live in coastal South Carolina in a relatively rural place, and I have chickens and I ride horses and I love being outside and have a mini little pretend homestead. It's really not that self-sufficient or anything, but we like to pretend that it is. And I also think it's funny, this is a little bit of a side note, but that I work in the comfort industry when I keep my set point at 78 in the summer. I am not that tuned into comfort myself. I like camping and I'm not into super controlled indoor environments, which is funny that I do that for design because I'm a hippie child that lives outside of sorts. But
you'd rather have the doors and windows open. Yeah.
But it does give me perspective too on how the standards for comfort, people are so unrealistic and it only gets worse, I think. What contractors are asked to maintain, basically, where people want to have it. People are very intense about the temperature.
Yeah, they want their air conditioner to run, cool the house to 63 when it's 40 degrees outside.
Totally.
That's a challenging thing to do from an equipment aspect for sure.
Yeah, it is.
You mentioned earlier about feedback loops. Do you have any current feedback loops where you're getting feedback on comfort of your designs or of past designs? Do you get any feedback at all, or have you gotten any feedback?
We have gotten feedback because we have repeat clients is one way. We have builders and architects that we've been designing for multiple years, or I should say the folks who've been here longer have. So that is one way. We do get feedback about problems. So it's not to say that we don't get feedback at all, but I would say I still wish it was more, both positive and negative. Sometimes when you don't get any, it's okay, it must have worked. Great. And maybe it does. The pre-planning, again, goes a long way to getting people the space they need for ducts, and a load calc even just goes a long way for a system working. But I do think it'd be great to get more feedback. I'm interested in the feedback of like, how are our plans, how easy are they to interpret, and what could be more clear, or what information, because we put a lot of information on there because we want to educate and have things be clear, but then is that too much information? Are we glazing over because there's too much text, stuff like that?
How about register placement? This is a big thing that people are starting to learn more about with heat pumps. And you said you do a lot of heat pumps. Have you gotten any feedback or found any importance with register placement or any challenges with register placement?
Yeah, our go-to strategy for most applications, where if we're doing like a ceiling register, for example, is we use the Hart and Cooley curved blade registers and place them towards an interior of a room and below towards an exterior wall. I do so that the air mixes well and then basically falls at the glazing or the exterior wall. I do get a lot of questions about that because it's more traditional to put a register by the window. And I always try to say in meetings, like expressly say that we don't want to blow air on people, because I know that when folks get into installing, that it's not going to always be able to be placed where I drew it. I know things come up, and so I want folks to understand the intent behind what I did, so that if they have to move it, they know where not to move it, like not to blow it over the head of a bed, for example, so that it isn't picked up. And same thing with ERV supplies, because even with the recovery core helps, but you're still, if that air is felt or sensed, it's very likely to be uncomfortable.
Go ahead and Eric, tell her you're chomping at the bit.
What?
He stayed over at my house. He had air blowing on him.
Oh, no.
Right on my face the whole night.
Really?
The whole night. Yeah.
I think it's because of his height, but I guess on a bed that doesn't make sense. Never mind.
Because my head was closer to the wall.
Yeah, right.
Duct outlet and designing that is a big challenge, especially when you're not exactly certain how a room is going to be used or where furniture is going to be placed in the room. Because like Bill just mentioned, his house, I would bet that the designer had no idea where the bed was going to be placed in that room and where that airflow would be. They just put it into the room, making the assumption where it's going to go.
Or it was convenient because of mechanical chases. Again, falling to a priority, which is sometimes got to be a priority, because then you can't build another chase out, then you're occupying. That's the puzzle that Eric was talking about before, putting all these things together.
That's a huge considerations for designers. And it fascinates me how different people think about it. To hear you talk about how you understand the construction, I think, like you said, it gives you a huge leg up in that. So to me, that would be one big thing, especially for designers to go learn, is look at how the construction is done and what needs to be able to get from point A to point B. And I really like using the curved blades like you talked about, or an interior high wall register for some designs I've been playing with, where it conditions that ceiling, which gives us better radiant temperature and things like that. So I love that thought process.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges we get is people wanting to use wood floor grills. In a new home, everyone's got hardwood floors, and they're like, oh, my hardwood flooring person's just going to make the grill, don't worry. And we're like, no, that's hard.
I'll happily accept that as long as they can provide me a K factor for it.
Right. But there's the balance. People want what they want, and they're your client. So I generally I have a wood floor grill brand that provides at least net-free area. So I'll size them for that and say, you got to use this or something equivalent with the same free area, but it's hard. Or linear diffusers. That's another one we get asked a lot, like linear slot diffusers, which is confusing at times for sizing, but people love them.
And they can be really challenging to install as well, because there's often framing members in the way of putting them in.
They have to run parallel to the framing members, yeah.
Yeah, so that becomes a big challenge for sure.
As we sort of wrap up here, I just want to return to one point. What advice would you give to help get more women in the industry, if If someone could either pass this along or get the message.
I don't have a great answer to that. I will say that the first time I ever met you, Eric, was actually at AHR. And well, we didn't meet, but I sat in your talk, you and Rachel's talk at AHR in Atlanta. And it was a talk about women in HVAC. And I really enjoyed that talk. And I enjoyed that you did it together. And I enjoyed that you as a man did it, because I think sometimes I was on a women in HVAC panel at the symposium last year, which was great. I think there's a good spot for all of that. But I want to see more women talking, like giving technical talks now, instead of being on a panel talking about women in HVAC. And it was great to see you, like as a man, giving other men pointers or things to think about in regards to gender in the industry. I thought that was really cool. And I remember one of y'all's main points was things that we do, quote unquote, accommodations that might make it easier for women to be in the trade are going to help men in the trade too. Like just the physical nature of this trade is hard on folks' bodies, installers' bodies. And so if we can use more dollies or tools that help people hurt the bodies less, that helps everyone.
I can't count the number of framing people in carpentry or in HVAC that tell me, my body's broken from years of abuse. Let's all take care of our bodies together, and then we can all live longer and healthier lives.
Totally.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That was a fun talk to do.
Very cool.
Rachel and I need to revisit that one of these days.
Yeah, we should do a live stream on that.
That was a good one.
We should. It'd be a lot of fun.
Yep. It was a really good one.
Any closing thoughts you have for our listeners?
Just that this community and industry is really fun. I mean, it's complicated. The technology of it and the science of it is complicated, but it's also incredibly interesting. And just that my mentors have been incredibly welcoming and helpful, and it has felt overwhelming. It still feels overwhelming at times, but it's just a great place to be. And so anyone who's interested in learning more, even like I went back to school mid-career and I've had a totally different second trajectory. That's not over. I'm sure I'll never stop learning, but it's not too late. And it just gives you such good skills for like your own, working on your own house. Everyone lives somewhere and you're always going to come up with something that needs fixed. And even if it's just knowing how to work with the people that are working on your house, it's just the skills are invaluable. It's a great place to be.
Thank you. That's a really nice way to close it up. It's a great place to be. Thank you, Sophie, for coming on and sharing your story, your perspectives with us, and we hope it enlightens some of our listeners to think a little bit differently about the work they do and maybe even to reach out and connect with you.
That'd be great. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Building HVAC Science podcast. If you have any questions or want to suggest a topic, reach out to us at marketing@truetechtools.com, TrueTechTools.com. And that's our website too. Full disclosure, I'm the owner of TrueTech. Eric Kaiser works for TrueTech. But the opinions expressed are those of my guests, my co-host, or myself, depending on who is speaking, of course. And if you're looking for tools or test instruments, TrueTechTools.com. We carry a lot. You can use the offer code HVACBS, and that's TrueTechTools.com. I want to thank you for listening and hopefully following this podcast. If you've not subscribed, please consider doing so. I also host the Res Talk podcast, and Sophie did mention today being a HERS rater, or an RFI, a rating field inspector. So these two worlds are tied together, and I think drawing closer and closer. Eric and I would agree on that. We just came back from the ResNet conference last week, just before recording with Sophie, and man, there's a lot going on in terms of HVAC and home energy ratings. You should check it out, resnet.us, and of course, the ResNet podcast, which you'll find on the homepage, which I'm the host of. Thanks again for listening. We hope you got something out of this episode, and we look forward to welcoming you back next time to the Building HVAC Science podcast. Take care.